Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 41 of Genn and Millie.
Ooh,
41.
41.
After 40, it's all kind of like,
Downhill
whatever.
from there until you get half a century.
When
That's my birth marker, so I decided.
40?
Because I turned a quarter of a century this year. So I'm going by quarter centuries is how I'm marking.
You're going to be
my
tired
age.
and your body's going to hurt. So at 41, I started to notice that things hurt. And today I can hardly move. We're off subject. Okay.
I'm totally off subject.
Welcome to Genn and Millie. We're a Gen Xer and a millennial. Share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess.
Hello. That's what I decided, though, because everybody said, decades are fine, half decades. But I'm like, isn't it cool to mark time with, quarter of a century?
Okay, why not mark time with every 5 years? That's how our class back home in Exeter does it. We celebrate, a lot of people get together for their reunions. We get together every 5 years.
Huh.
So we don't just wait till the 25. We do 20, 25, 30.
Huh.
And actually this weekend I might go back just for fun, even though it's not
Not
a 5 year.
Weekend.
I love my class. They're just
That's cool.
awesome.
That makes a difference.
Amazing people who I hear from all the time. My friend Jeremy reaches out. We talk about music. Sherry and I are great friends. She just texted me. She makes me laugh. I mean, I think these are people I was lucky enough to grow up with, 17 in our class. Mm-hmm. And there are probably, a good 5 of us that are pretty tight yet. Mm-hmm. So we celebrate all the time. Don't wait 25 years to celebrate. Show a mile marker. Mile marker can be shown a little bit of generational stuff. I swore I would never, ever complain about how my body is reacting to time.
Okay. Oh, no.
If you don't yet watch Grace and Frankie, it's really good. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
It's so good. It's Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda.
Okay.
And it's a great storyline, but it's really funny. And Jane is dating a younger guy. And you can tell that even subconsciously she's pushing back against it. She's like, oh, he'll just figure out, that I'm tired. And she hurt her knee breaking into a house by climbing through the doggy door.
Oh, no.
So she's limping around. And so there's this scene, and it's really great. I've watched it a couple times now because they elicit so much emotion for me because that's where I feel like I'm at.
Yeah.
She looks at him and she says, oh, yeah, you want me? Do you want this? And she takes off her fake eyelashes, and she takes out her hair extension pieces. And then she goes in her purse and gets a makeup wipe and takes all of her makeup off. And she turns around and she's like, this is me. Because she's really done up.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful because, of course, he loves her anyway. But I think one of the things she says, so she has this same episode. She does not want to admit that she needs a scooter at Lowe's.
Oh, no.
So she's limping around with her knees really, really bad, but she doesn't want to do it. But it's in row 234.
Oh, no.
And so row 234, she finally gets in the scooter. She's like, I got to finally do this. Well, she doesn't want to run into her daughter's boyfriend. So she tries to leave Lowe's without paying for it, throws a $20 bill for this piece of
Oh, no.
whatever that she picked up, and then runs into a cop car with the scooter. And then the cop comes over and says, I don't even know, what to say about this. But I can smell alcohol on your breath, because her character, Grace, is just constantly with a martini in her hand and a flask.
No.
So it is a great scene.
Oh,
But her daughter's boyfriend finds her, gives her a ride home. And she says, it's like this it's a slope when your body starts to go through different things. So I remember when I was 25 and I was done having children at 25, and I had Sean, and I lost all of this weight and couldn't figure out why. And it was just because I was active finally in my life. And my mom gave me what I like to call a curse. And she said, you just wait till you turn 30. And you just wait till you turn 35. And you just wait till you turn 40. And I thought, how rude. How rude. But also, no, that won't happen to me. And then it did. And there were just things that no matter how much I worked out or how I changed my eating habits or that just changed. And there are certain seasons of life that I think age us more.
Sure.
And I'm noticing, so I went through a stage where I noticed a lot of wrinkles. And then I kind of got past that stage where I noticed those so much. And now I'm noticing dark circles under my eyes that also sleep would help with that. But I mean, certain things that once you see them, it's like you acknowledge them and then they're there. Yep. I remember the first time I saw back fat and I thought, who put that there?
Put that there.
And take it away. Because I turned around and went, what is that? How did that get? I mean, we had a big mirror, and I looked, and
what's that there? That's okay.
So, I think with generational differences, aging is a big one.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I've been reading up and learning a lot about the way that aging affects effects of aging in the workplace. Effects of aging culturally, how we treat people who are older, particularly how older women are treated and regarded. So Grace and Frankie, if you're not yet watching it, is it talks all about that.
Cool.
She's a CEO of a company, and then the daughter takes over, and the daughter doesn't want her there anymore. I mean, it's a really great show.
Cool.
Wasn't planning on talking about that today. Sorry, whoops.
That's all right. Oh my gosh.
My body hurts from working out with the group training. So Amy, who is the trainer at Anytime Fitness, she's great. Lots of energy, lots of smiles at 5:30 in the morning, which she can save. But she puts together a great workout, and it's a group.
Okay.
I just want to clarify about Woo. It is not always on. So I do not like to work out with people. I like to keep my sweat to myself. I need that time alone. But I made a promise to my friend T that I would give it a try. And it is kicking me in the rear. It is really hard stuff. So today, when I walked in, I saw the stairs. I was like, do we have an elevator?
Stairs. Oh my gosh.
So,
yeah. So I think that's interesting because I have almost like a little bit of a reverse situation where, I ran the Lincoln Half, which was
huge. Awesome.
Which was just huge.
And I will share the video if you would like.
Stop. You do not want to see the video. Which was just a huge accomplishment for me. But, me being me, not having high woo, not being an extrovert, like I just love to go to the gym by myself and listen to audiobooks or, listen to music or something while I was at the gym running or while I was running outside. And, I got so excited and was so excited to share my accomplishment with people that I posted on Instagram about it. And I was like, oh, this is like, if I can go from I couldn't even run a mile in January, right?
It's huge test.
To then running, 13 miles a month ago. So it was awesome. Just like 5 months of just really being intentional about, and I've always been active. I've always done yoga, but just being something that I really saw as like, this is a really great indicator that I'm feeling well if I can run, because that's always been a trigger for health issues for me. So anyway, I did this and I shared this. And so long story short, I signed up for another half marathon in the fall, which I'm so excited about to continue training. It was very much a personal thing again. I started sharing this with people. And now I have a team of 10 people that I'm running this half marathon for that I'm like, have been dubbed the team leader. And I love my friends, and I'm glad, and I'm like excited about it. But they want to like train together, and
that sounds like hell.
And do like a shorter race in the summer. And I'm like just trying to be excited about it. And I don't think any of them listen, But actually, some of them started listening. But okay, great,
because you're a leader.
In my mouth, anyway. So they all started listening.
Sorry, everyone.
Sorry, everybody. But
I say that on every podcast.
But I think like it's pushing me though to be out of my comfort zone, right? Just like your group classes are. Like, and I definitely encourage, and I'm definitely an enabler. I never thought any of them would sign up to run a half marathon with me in the fall, but they did, and they're spreading the word, and more people are joining. And it's such a cool thing that I'm glad that my story of like I couldn't even run a mile, without having to stop, has like now transformed into like 10 people setting this goal for themselves, right? But it also is hard because the introvert in me loves that time. And so it's hard to coordinate and to just be able to like be like, okay, I'm going to leave work a little early and go for a run, or I'm going to go to the gym at 9:00 tonight, to be able to do that without having to coordinate.
You can run at
people.
night or in the evening?
I always run in the evening. I never run in the morning. Ugh. But anyway, so it's wonderful because they've all started listening. So now I'm putting my foot in my mouth. But essentially, it's making me just like your early morning gym class, right? It's pushing our strengths out in a different way. And I think it's interesting that both of us, and I don't know if it's something about the gym or we have very different strengths, but both of us like to be solitary in
Let's think
in
time.
Our gym effort, right? It's think time, and both of us do have a lot of strategic thinking themes, so maybe it's that. But I'm just trying to like figure out. Okay, I really am excited. I love hanging out with all my friends, right? They're my friends for a reason. I chose them to be my friends, and they have chosen me. But at the same time, it's a little bit.
It'd be better to go to dinner.
Yeah. To me, I'm like, let's go grab a drink.
Right.
After we all have our independent runs where I have
right.
my hour.
And then let's talk about them, and then never do this together. So I think what's fascinating, and we never prep these. Mm-mm. So I just got done meeting with our new intern, Alexa, today. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about her strengths, and we were talking about ways that she wants to build on strengths within her top 5. Like, how can I practice these more? And we talked about, I specifically said, the best kind of work comes from when you're stretched out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure.
And if we're not doing that, we're not growing. Mm-hmm. I've been doing a ton of out of my comfort zone stuff recently.
Good.
Sometimes, but it's so easy to do what you know.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to fall back into old patterns, old habits. Mm-hmm. Also, I think we're really drawn, and this will tie into resilience and ACEs, we're drawn to what we know.
Yep.
Even subconsciously. Mm-hmm. So we're drawn to a lifestyle similar to maybe what we grew up with. We are drawn to what we know. And I think we don't even, it's because it doesn't require any work.
Yeah.
The stretching and the building and the trying and the growth happens when we do things that are unfamiliar.
Yeah.
So as much as I love morning time by myself, so I'm learning, I get up at 4:30 now, so I can have some morning time before I go to do this 5:30 workout. And I, jazz hands woo, that's not me there. I'm barely talking to people. There's a lot of smiling happening. It's not me.
It's not me.
But what I'm kind of loving about it is it's completely stretching me both physically and mentally. So it requires, it's circuit training, and it requires a lot of coordination. So Tess, we had to do this morning, we have to do it's a box jump. So you literally just jump in a square.
Yep.
So it's with your 2 feet like a bunny hop.
Yep.
Yep. And, kind of quickly. I have to talk to myself.
No. Oh
yes,
my gosh.
To do this. And then Amy did this thing where with the step up, and we were supposed to jump on it and jump back down, and I'm like stepping up 1 foot at a time. I can barely do that. So it pushes me in all these ways that feel like a risk because when I don't know what I'm doing, I get really, I'll go back to old.
Okay, so that's interesting because that's kind of the framework you are approaching it with. For me, it's more of and I think this is like, we're talking potentially in the future about like Enneagram number, or even like the basements of some of my strengths, that I'm such an independent person that I don't like to be tied down to anybody else. So I think the thing about all my friends signing up to run this race with me, which I am so excited about, it's going to be so much fun. We've talked about doing like t-shirts or coordinating outfits and, having these fun things. But what if I run at a slightly different pace than anybody else? Am I going to have to adjust my pace, right, to run with them, right? Because is it going to be this communal thing? So all these things are running through my head, and it goes back to the fact that I like to do things how I like to do them. And I don't have to be liable to how anybody else does anything, right? Which is interesting when we talk about adaptability, right? So you talk about the misconceptions of woo. Misconceptions of adaptability might be, well,
sure she can.
Sure, she just would change her pace, right? Just, you know, and so understanding that there are these misconceptions even with our strengths. But I'm excited as well, like you are with your 5:30 group workout classes. I am excited to get out, and hopefully when it's nicer outside, we'll spend more time outside running. But just to spend time with them, prepping for this. But
you remember that we talked way back, we talked about misconceptions of our generation.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said around misconceptions of our strengths.
For sure.
And we've talked about this quite a bit when it comes to, you know, balcony and basement and barrier labels and those kinds of things. But I think it's always good to revisit that.
Yeah.
Because particularly when it comes to stretch moments.
Yep.
I'm finding it's easier for me to get, if things are difficult and I'm in a challenging situation, I can very easily go into the basement of my strengths and like it there.
Yeah.
I'm going to hang out here.
And justify it, right? Like, I'm okay to be in this mood because this is...
And I think back to all the, you know, teaching and learning that I've been able to do with Wild, and it's about being below the line.
Yep.
It's your hemispheres of the brain, and below the line, that's where rigidity and shame and anxiousness and sadness are. And what it takes to rise above the line is courage.
Yeah.
And so really being intentional.
Stepping outside of your comfort zone.
And really being intentional to say, I'm going to do better with this. I loved the conversation with Alexa because she was talking about positivity. And she said, I have the ability to always bring myself out of a bad mood. Like it's a new day, or you have an opportunity right now. It's so much optimism.
Yeah.
And I think there's sometimes misconceptions around positivity. Like they're just walking around thinking everything's great. No, they just know that it's up to them, that they can choose optimism.
True.
And I think, so there's so much misconception around strength. So that's one of the questions I'd like to throw out to our
listeners.
I was going to say group.
Our group, our team.
The 5 people I hear from. I would love to hear what's a misconception about you in general. Yep. Whether it's in the way that you present yourself, whether it's in your generational perspective or within your strengths. What's a misconception that people have? I've been told a lot recently that I make a lot of assumptions. And if I'm not getting the answer to my question, I'll go 5 different ways to get the answer. But if someone doesn't want to give me an answer, or they just want to stay in I don't know, I make an assumption about the response. And I need to give some grace for the I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to do for me. Yeah. My input strategic says there's always an answer.
There's always an answer.
There's always a reason.
That's what I was just thinking. I was like, why would someone say, you know, I know some people say I don't know, but.
There's always a reason. Well, also they need the pause. I don't. No. I mean, at any given time I can explain what I'm feeling or thinking. Yeah. And that's the gift of
communication.
It is.
It is.
With a little bit of empathy.
It's really good.
So on that note, do you want to talk about your resilience quiz?
Yeah. Okay.
So you'll remember that Tess had a 0 ACEs score. Which I think is almost relatively impossible, but okay.
So I have 0 ACEs, which I think especially just in our field and the people we interact with, we talked about this last episode, is definitely a lot less common because people tend to be drawn to our field because of maybe some past experience in their own life. And so I also took this resiliency quiz, which we have linked already on the Worth Mentioning board. But essentially, resiliency meaning kind of what did your community look like and how did it cope under stress? How did it cope in different times, right? So
I'm going to stop for a second here and go back. ACEs, if you're just joining us for the first time, is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment. So it helps to kind of take a look at what kind of potential trauma that you may have experienced in your childhood or in your life. So great starting point to start kind of thinking about resilience and growth mindset. I have a high ACEs score, and when we were chatting about this, Tess said, I think mine's pretty low, and it was 0.
0. So I love this, and so this is maybe too where we can talk about resiliency. But I had a great conversation, and I hope she's okay with me sharing this. But with my boss Jen, and she was talking about her daughter, and how her daughter doesn't have many ACEs, doesn't have many adverse childhood experiences, right? But how she had to tell her daughter that she had to lean back on dance because it was becoming too much for the family. So they went from, I think she said it was like 6 different dance groups that she was in, and they said, or 4 or 5 different, and she had to cut it down to 3 this next year. So she had to choose which 3 she wanted to be a part of. And, you know, Jen was like, you could have thought the world was ending, right? And she said, it was after she listened to our podcast, she said, that when I thought about it, and I'm like, why on earth are you freaking out about it? You know, Jen's really a good realist. I appreciate her.
She's also a great mom.
A great mom, you know, but then she took a step back and she interpreted that and she said, that probably seems like trauma to her, right? Because it's relative, right? She doesn't have adverse childhood experiences like the ones that are noted in the ACEs quiz,
right.
Or the ACEs assessment. And so something like that, where you have to give up a little bit of what you love, right, even though it's probably for the best, could seem like trauma.
And
right?
important to happen now.
Yeah.
So it's perceived kind of a failure or a loss.
Yep.
And we, as parents, it's hard sometimes to allow your child to experience failure or loss, but it's critical in the way that they build on their own sense of resilience. How Children Succeed by Paul Tuff, great book, just talks about we have to help our kids fail and fail with a safety net behind them, knowing that they're supported, but also knowing that failure is part of life, because if we get to an age and not experience trauma or difficulty, and then it happens, it can be really, really difficult on an adult. Yes.
Yep. So I think that when we talk about ACEs, you know, you might not have a high ACEs score, right? Like that's a really great indicator of maybe the external things, right, within your life that affected to trauma, perceived trauma, or wounds that you had as a result of that, right? But there's also people like, and I think this is something I've really had to grapple with, and I'm almost preaching to myself when I say this, because I could very easily, and I think it's been very hard for me, especially just in church and around people who've gone through really hard stuff. Like I've had friends who've walked through incredibly traumatic events, to not want to say, why do I still feel the way I do about things? Because I've never had anything bad happen to me, right? Like it's very easy to say, right?
But you have.
Right, okay, but, you know, according to an assessment like this, right, I haven't had anything, right? It's been my interpretation of events that might not have looked like trauma, right? Like I probably was told at one point I couldn't do dance, right? Like Jen's daughter. And that was a perception then on my part of loss, of grief, of trauma, and then of wounds that resulted, right? And so I think it's good even for some of our listeners, and I don't know if there's anybody out there, but where you could maybe go and you can take the ACEs quiz, anyone can online, and you can say, well, why am I still experiencing some of the behavior patterns I'm stuck in? Or why do I have some of these wounds, you know, from my childhood or from my young adulthood that I just can't get over, even though I, like on paper, I don't have, you know, there's nothing wrong. I have a great family and a great upbringing. And so I think that's good to note. Just to know, I think it's so easy to want to like compare, you know, my family history to yours and be like, I never had to walk through anything really hard, right? Like, why do I still wrestle with some of the areas of personal development, the areas that I need to grow in?
Because we are uniquely designed to do that as human beings.
Yep.
We are designed to wrestle with hard things.
Yeah,
and that's where I think resiliency is so important. And what we do with mentoring is so important. I've had just kind of a great realization as to what drew me to do this work. Not because my ACEs score was high, but because I had all of these people in my life who said, I believe in you, and this is possible for you. Now, that can happen to anyone at any time. I think self-doubt and doubt in general is part of everyone's journey.
Sure.
And where we find it or where we get stuck in it, it's easier to fall back into some of our even self-deprecating patterns than it is to be bold and confident. I mean, that's not, I don't think for many people it's easy.
Default, right? Yeah. So I think it's good to like think about like some of these tools are really helpful. Like obviously ACEs is used by a lot of different agencies, right, to assess level of need. But also to know that that might be an external indicator of some things that happen to you. But I even loved some of these questions on the resiliency because it was almost like an internal measurement of some of these things, right? So this is linked, it's from Trauma
Harmony.
Matters.
Through Project Harmony.
Through Project Harmony.
Yep.
We had a mentor academy about it not too long ago, but we have it linked to our worth mentioning board on Pinterest. But some of these questions, like, I believe that my mother loved me when I was little. You know, definitely true, probably true, not sure, probably not true, definitely not true. And so even to look at some of these questions and to say, this is my perception of how I felt loved and cared for, right? You know, when I was little, other people helped my mother and father take care of me, and they seemed to love me. So asking about some of those other factors probably that ACEs had, right? But almost the interpretation of some of those things and how it built up resiliency, right, in you, how you react to stress as a result.
And I saw this as so much more external. Because I was thinking of those around me. It's my concept of them.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's an external evaluation of the external pieces
right,
of the
build
people.
Resiliency, right? Okay, so I think you're comparing external, internal versus a resiliency score, right?
I'm looking at this as ACEs to me feels like it's external factors.
Yep.
Resilience to me, this quiz feels like external factors.
This quiz, with resiliency.
Yes.
So when I compare this, though, because a lot of that, I just took ACEs again to make sure it was 0. Like, a lot of those questions are, I experienced physical abuse, right? It was a fact, it was an event, right?
Yes.
All of these questions comparatively are my interpretations of maybe some of those events, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of why I was explaining this felt more internal as compared to, right, or more my personal interpretation, right? My perception of maybe some of those events and how they led to my building of resiliency. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I think what this elicits for me is just tremendous gratitude. It's kind of like the personal trauma that I've experienced. I have, probably from the example of many people, I always see the gift.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes me a little bit, but I always see the gift. So in a really rough situation with my family, right at the time that I got married and was having Lauren, I can look back now and see I developed tremendous strength, and I developed a tremendous perception and perspective that I knew I didn't want to ever make anybody feel the way that I was feeling. That I had a gift and I had an opportunity in the way that I was present with my own children, that if that didn't happen for me, I could always give that to them.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, just like I don't know if that's intrinsic, that I just know if you want to heal that, you're going to have to, you can't control what happened to you, but you're going to have to give that kind of love that you always hope to receive to others.
Yeah.
So that the cycle stops. Because when I think back, you know, a lot of my mom's trauma is because of her trauma from her mom. And, you know, just to step back and say, okay, I'd like this to stop now. And so the only thing that I can do about that is to make sure it doesn't continue into the next generation.
Okay, so I challenge you. I think that at first I was like, oh, it's probably your empathy, right? But I think it's actually more so your connectedness, because you see the, you know, connectedness, even strategic, right? Like the cyclical nature of life that, you know, and I think about, you know, connectedness in kind of more spiritual patterns, right? How things evolve, maybe emotionally, soul-wise, to be able to say, I know that this is a generational pattern, right? And I then choose to actively stop it, right? But being able to recognize that, I think, is probably a blend of those strengths within you, to see the pattern, right? But also then to know how that pattern would continue, right, if you had not stopped it.
And so when we talk about strategic, you often talk about patterns. I often talk about pathways. And I think I see it as my strategic pathway. Creating a new pathway, taking a different road. I also think what would be really interesting for us to take a look at, I mean, we should design our own sociologists. I mean, we both, a forgiveness assessment. If we were brutally, totally honest, what is your capacity to forgive? What is your capacity to let go? What is your capacity to truly move forward. Because I think that has to do with a lot of ways that we experience life.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So I don't know what one of the questions would be. I'm sure we could design it. This is brilliant. We should just
we should just do
patent,
it.
copyright, Genn and Millie. Forgiveness assessment. What's your capacity of forgiveness? What's your capacity of asking to be forgiven? Because I think forgiveness is a really powerful tool when it comes to resilience.
Yeah, for sure.
And trauma.
For sure. That's good. So, yeah, I guess we're kind of wrestling with these, but would love for to get your guys' feedback on this as well, just kind of along the lines of kind of what we posed last episode as well. And I'm going to posit this in a way for not only reflecting on our childhood experiences and our resiliency, but also how to then wield that information to affect our lives now, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to dig into your childhood wounds, right, if it doesn't then impact how you're living your life right now. Just like you mentioned, right? Like, what has been done to you is done to you. And so you can affect change, right, within the generations that come after you, right? And so, but I think that can even happen now, right? We know of a lot of people that are walking through therapy, that walk through counseling for trauma, that are trying to change and make sense of what's happened to them in the now so that they can be changed in the future. So this actually, it's kind of a funny framework because it doesn't come at all from psychology, sociology. It actually comes from a training I sat in with a marketing firm last week.
Oh.
And they were actually talking about this cycle of making sense of your website and social media data. And so I've been kind of looped into some of these conversations, and they say, you can never really know exactly why you're getting the results you are, unless you send out like a separate survey. But you can see the data, you can see where web traffic goes, you can see clicks and likes, but you never can really tell motivations for a user activity online unless you've sent out a separate survey asking about their motivations, right?
And they're answering honestly.
Right. So they said the cycle is you can look at that data, and first you make inferences based on that data. Then you make meaningful changes, and then you reflect on it. It's so simple, but I loved the idea of those three steps in a cyclical way, right? First is inferences, right? You look at the data, you look at your life, you look at your emotions, and you say, what are some observations I have about this, right? Then second is you make meaningful change, right? And I added that word meaningful to, I'm interpreting this a little bit out of marketing, right? Make meaningful change, and I would say, at least from a researcher perspective, from a development perspective, you don't want to make a ton of change, right? Make one, and that's even what they said, make one small change. Start by tracking one marketing campaign, one email campaign, right? And then finally, step 3 is then looking again at the data and reflecting. Step 3 is reflection. So reflecting upon what are the new things that have happened, right? How has the data changed, right? So when you don't know motivations behind user activity, for example, if you were to, make a small change, like I'm going to start and do this marketing campaign, or I'm going to do this email campaign, if you were to look at the data beforehand, make the meaningful change, right, and then reflect back on how the data has been affected by it, you can probably make more accurate inferences, right, about your user activity. And so I was thinking about this, and everyone's getting a little precursor, because I was actually going to write this as the strengths blog this week, but it's Omaha Gives Day, so words all over the place. So I didn't write a blog again. Yep, surprise, surprise. Haven't written one since March. There we go, people. But I love this cycle because I think about this. I think this is a really way you can intentionally approach strengths development, personal growth, even healing from some past trauma, right? Is to say, okay, yesterday I got upset about this. What inferences can I make about why I was upset, right? What might be underlying that, right? What are some observations that I can make based on that reaction, right? And that's just one example. It could be, I keep getting stuck in a rut, or I'm late all the time and I don't want to be late anymore. Or, all of these things, like even some of the things that naturally come out of our strengths, right? But you may want to change, right? So, you can make these inferences, make these observations, right? And then think of one step for meaningful change that you could maybe almost test to see how that is going to affect your behavior, right? And so, for example, if I got, I can use the example with my friends because they'll probably listen here, and then I'll make a meaningful change and we'll collect more data on it, right? So I might be maybe upset and a little anxious about the fact that they all want to run this half marathon with me in the fall, right? So maybe a meaningful change that I can make is, instead of comparing this half marathon to my Lincoln half, right, I can approach it from a different perspective to say, this isn't about beating that personal record. This isn't about having all of these 3 hours of alone time of running, right? This is about a collective experience with my friends. So if I make that simple change, right, how can then I reflect on what my next few weeks are going to look like in terms of training? Right? If I make that change when I approach this half marathon, that's small. It's just a way I'm even viewing it. That isn't even a substantial change of my time and energy. How am I going to maybe interact with my friends differently? Will I invite them to run more? Will I invite them to go out and walk or do a cycling class to change up our routine a little more? And then, once I look at maybe the next few weeks of how my training looks like, right, then I can reflect on, okay, did that change result in a different reaction next time somebody asks me about the half marathon in the fall, or next time I hear about another person who signed up to be on our team?
So it's essentially the recipe for success. When something's not working, you step back, you look at it, you make some changes, and move forward with those changes and see if they work. Also, it reminded me of the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Sure.
But we all do that.
Yep, we do.
I think often to a default, that we just keep walking in the same path.
Yeah.
I mean, you can almost see your footprints that you fall back into, because it doesn't require effort.
Yeah.
And it's a really basic, simple way to do something that doesn't require effort.
It goes back to the whole idea, right, that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. I promise we don't plan these things.
We don't.
That we only really change, right, when we step outside of our comfort zones. So I think that that's a good way to do it. And you're right. It's probably something that, we do a lot to have change, but I just like the way that it was kind of those 3 steps, almost like but it's like in a continual cycle, right? So in your reflections, you then make new inferences, right, to then make another small change. And I think that's, I don't know, I think it's something even at this, time, we're in the end of May, where at the beginning of the year, we have all these lofty goals to make changes in our lives, right?
Yeah, but so much happens.
So much happens.
I mean,
so
you
much
just
has
can't
looked different
even
since
predict.
January, right? So much has looked different since January. So much has changed. And so how can we even make this a more regular pattern of our own development, in order to continue to have change in our lives, continue to have growth with our strengths, with our personal development? And I think it's really good because, I now have been... it's been 2.5 years since I got my certification for coaching for Gallup. And, I've been coaching some people on staff for nearly that amount of time. And so thinking about, we're even in a rut when it comes to coaching, right?
That happens easily.
That happens very easily. So, and I know you probably experienced this too, but how can we start looking at this pattern, this cycle more intentionally to say, okay, even in our practices of personal growth and of stepping outside of our comfort zone, we then get stuck in a rut, right? I feel like it's this constant uphill, against the stream, trying to run up an escalator battle, right? Of all of life is trying to put us into these boxes, these comfort zones, these routines, right? And it just continues this pattern and this cycle of
it's no way to live.
We are.
It's no way to live.
Right.
I keep thinking of the question that I've been asking a lot of people recently, because I've kind of gotten away from my same old questions, but what surprises you, or what has been a recent surprise, or what are you most surprised by? So a couple reasons that I do that. One, Angelise Aaron's work, anthropologist, great work on questions for the self.
Cool.
When I write now in my gratitude journal, it's what's something that surprised me today. And then many of you know I like a lot of mystic things, and so manifesting is one of the things that I really, basically if you've ever read the book The Secret, it's about the law of attraction. What you put out there, what you manifest, what you think about it's what's going to show up. So if I say I am crabby, I'm going to see crabby, 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 crabby. If I say I am powerful, I am whole, you manifest that. So one of the things that I made the mistake of doing was put surprises in my manifestation for this year. And I'm all done with them now. I would like to not have any more. I mean, I took that thing out of there and burned it in the last full moon. I was like, okay, done with surprises. Don't need any more of those. But I think it's amazing what happens. I would encourage people to think about this. Where are you experiencing out of your comfort zone? What are you doing to be out of your comfort zone right now in this season, in this stage of life, this year, May? But also to think about, what are you manifesting? What message are you putting out to the universe that, oh, well, big surprise, it keeps showing back up. Yep. And I have to really get real with myself when I think about what I put out there. My friend Erin, who I love, Erin always reminds me that we sometimes speak things that aren't in our truth. And when we're doing that, it'll manifest in these really wonky, not positive ways. So if you're in a, let's say you're in a situation where you don't believe what you're being told, and you look at that person and you say, I trust you, I believe you, and you don't, if you intrinsically here do not feel it, that that's the message, and you're claiming an untruth, you are creating more and more and more of that.
Oh, I just don't know if that's humanly possible for me.
To what?
To claim an untruth. I don't know if that's a strength.
Baloney. Because you can be, I've watched you be gentle and soft, even with me, when I probably needed bold and harsh.
Okay, so it's even like not even what you say,
even
how
nuanced.
your approach to people.
Even nuanced.
Okay.
I just read an article by Eric Barker about marriage, and he said one of the things, his biggest piece of advice is to be absolutely brutally honest. And you know what that means.
Okay. That's good.
Now, granted, there's
a little bit of
there's some caution to that. But I think one of the things that I've noticed about my relationship with my friends and my family, that is just part of us. Yeah. And if you can't be, I don't really want that. And so it's no big deal. We talk often about Lauren's brutal honesty. Yeah. She doesn't listen very much, so we can say all this. But we talk about how she'll come in and say, "What's up, sea bass?" if I'm wearing 4 different colors of blue.
Yep.
And she just feels a very solid comfort being completely, totally honest. Now, some people may see that as, wow, you are so hard on your mom, or you're disrespectful towards your mom. It is an established law within our family that brutal honesty is who we are. You're just, it's just raw and real, and that's it. And I know you still love me. Yeah. And maybe I do look like a sea bass today. And then it's on me to say, but I like this. But I'm going to wear it anyway. And if I don't respond that way, then I'm not living in my truth either. Okay. So I think it'd be really important for people to think about the kind of truth statements that they're putting out and manifesting on. Because if you're not believing in what you're doing or saying, it just doesn't work.
No, for anybody, for sure.
I had a wonderful conversation with my friend Cassie this week about integrity. And what does it truly mean to walk in your truth and in integrity? Yeah. And I think that's a really good question to ponder. I love deep, meaningful conversations with people. I mean, just in this week, I've had a lot of them, and I think, how lucky are we that we get the opportunity to do that with each other? Yeah. We had to, during our United Way meeting, what's a great combination? No, duo, partner?
Oh, pairing.
Pairing. And we were supposed to choose between ketchup and mustard, peanut butter and jelly, Hall & Oates, wine and cheese, salt and pepper? No.
Beyonce and Jay-Z.
Beyonce and
Sweet
Jay-Z.
And salty.
So...
Or you could come up with your own.
And did you hear Jen? She said, this is one of my favorite pairings.
Oh.
Genn and Millie. I thought that was very nice.
That was very nice.
But I thought that was such a great way to think about things.
Yeah.
And to create our own.
And the interpretation, I think, of that at the after effect, it was some of these pairings, if you notice, are opposites. Some of these pairings are very similar. They share a commonality, right? Like they're both foods, or, they're both people, and some of them aren't. And so, like, one of the examples from the people was a recliner and their TV.
Yeah, which I didn't get because I don't do that.
I don't do that either. So like, but
I'm
I understand
folding clothes if I'm watching a show.
I understand the concept based on my parents for the most part. But, so I thought it was just very interesting. Even in some of those duos, like, you were talking about like Hall & Oates and who you picked and how, have always been together, right? So the duo that I picked is not together anymore, right? I talked about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and right how the Beatles broke up. Lennon was assassinated, all these things, but they were such a great duo because when you read anything about them, they egged each other on to make the best music possible
because they were different.
Because they were so different from one another, and so that's why I like.
But yet in integrity with one another, in honesty with one another, in truth,
sometimes brutal honesty.
Yes.
Yep. So, okay. So good questions. I felt like this one was a little all over the place, and I hope my friends don't read it and listen to it. And
I don't even know how we can title this one.
And I'm like,
hodgepodge of lots of discussion.
Yep.
It's Omaha Gives
Thankfully,
Day.
I don't have to title it. I just call it episode 41.
I do think asking, tell us about a favorite pairing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mine is a great cab and peanut butter cups, which I've mentioned before.
That's awesome.
And if you want to catch the connectedness, you grab the peanut butter cup off the table.
Yep.
Before we left that meeting.
I did. I gave it to you.
And it goes well with cab, just saying.
Yep. I think that's the individualization in me. It's like this. As soon as I sat down, I knew you were coming to the meeting. And I said, that is Allie's. Not surprised you didn't grab it for yourself. So I grabbed it for you. I became your advocate in peanut butter realm. Alrighty, well, thank you everybody for tuning into Hodgepodge. Is that what we're calling it? Episode 41 of Genn and Millie. And so please share any brutally honest comments you have with us, even about our conversations. Are there ways that you feel like we can improve, and how that we do this? What inferences do you make about listening to us? How can we then maybe make some small changes, and how can we reflect to see what the impact is on those changes? I'd love to even incorporate that cycle into our time of podcasting, and so feel free to let us know. And then we'd love to hear a little bit about, if you take ACEs or the resiliency score, a little bit about what that means for your life. So what is maybe a part of you, was the question that we posed, was the question that we ended up posing. I'm trying to remember what was a part of you that maybe are some assumptions, right, about your strengths, about maybe what your childhood life was like, maybe about your generation,
forgiveness,
and then kind of how that has lent itself to maybe your ACEs score, maybe how you approach forgiveness. So would love to hear a little bit about that, and then would love for you to implement this kind of cycle that I talked about of inferences, meaningful change, and reflection upon that change. And let's see how it goes. Let's push ourselves out of our comfort zone, and really try and grow and change, and do life as it should be, right? Constantly growing, constantly learning. That's the learner in me, if you can't tell. Feel free, interact with us. Anyway, again, a hodgepodge. Golly gee, I'm supposed to read these 2 sentences, and I did not get there. Okay, to interact with us and share the questions that we, share your responses to the questions we posed in this episode. Feel free to either respond to the email if you're getting this via email from Allie, or follow us on Instagram at Genn and Millie, and drop us a comment there. We'd love to hear from you. That's at Genn and Millie, at GENNANDMILLIE. Until next time.